Okay, good morning, everybody. This is Paul Roebuck with InterNACHI. I want to say welcome to you, and I'm sure we're going to have more joining us as we keep going here this morning, but welcome. Good, happy morning, Monday morning to y'all. We've got Chris Crawford with Spring Branch Air Conditioning going to be presenting to us this morning. And Chris, I'd like to start with, I've seen in your bio that you served 20 years in the military. I want to say thank you for your service. We're glad that you took the time to come and present to us today. I know you're a busy man with your schedule, but I know that you have worked with a lot of our inspectors in the Houston area doing air conditioning inspections and other stuff for these guys. And you come with high reference from several of the inspectors, and I know you presented some of our local chapters. I want to thank you for your time and consideration of that. I hope it's paid off for you in some referral business. And we always seem to see that happen to people that come and share their time with us. It seems like you get blessed the same as we get blessed with your coming and teaching us. So again, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Chris, because I know we're going to have a ton of questions pop up here. And we'll take time with your questions as we go. And I do want to say to those of you that are in attendees today that there is no Texas Real Estate Commission credit hours for this course. However, no matter if you're in the state of Texas or outside of the state of Texas, you can go into your InterNACHI profile and add this course for 2 hours of InterNACHI continued education credit. So with that, Chris, I'll turn it over to you and let's go on.
Yes, sir. Well, and thank you. Yes, it was my honor to serve in the military. The Air Force was a great way to get started in the world. And I really enjoyed it. Since then, we've done some great things. And really, that's the first thing that we're talking about is a little bit about who the heck am I and why am I talking to you? I grew up in Central Texas, North Houston, North Austin area. If you know where that's at, Killeen, Texas is actually the town that I grew up in. My family was split between the Crawfords and the Kilpatricks. The Crawfords owned a construction business. We built custom homes, and we also did a lot of home remodels. And so I learned all about construction doing that as a kid. Typical family business, right? When you're about 10 years old and you're big enough to carry stuff, you start working during the summer. And so that's kind of where I started learning about construction. The other side of the family, the Kilpatricks, had an air conditioning and heating company in Killeen. Quality Heating and Air Conditioning was the name of the business. And so it was always a fight during the summers to see which side of the family would get Chris to work for them basically for free. And so free labor typically is how family businesses work. So I grew up doing that stuff as a kid all the way until I was 18. Graduated out of high school and knew for sure that I needed to get out of Killeen because there's not a lot of opportunity there. So I joined the Air Force, went into aircraft maintenance. I spent 20 years in the Air Force working on fighter aircraft. And air conditioning is pretty simple comparative to fighter airplanes. But really, really enjoyed my time in the military, met my wife there. And so really can't complain, right? It was a great way to get started in the world and figure out, what I really wanted to do. So anyway, retired in 2009, came back to Texas. I ran a family business up in Killeen for about 4 years, and highly don't recommend that, by the way. Mixing family with money and business is probably not always the best recipe. So highly don't recommend doing that. Anyway, we ended up moving back down to Houston. I've ran 3 of the largest AC companies in Houston as a general manager. Finally got tired of the corporate rigmarole BS that you see all over the place. And I bought Spring Branch Air Conditioning about 3.5 years ago now. And we've been doing some great things since. The history with Spring Branch. Spring Branch has been around Houston since 1956. It was 3rd generation owned family business. The gentleman wanted to retire and didn't have anybody to turn it over to, so he sold it to me. with the small caveat that I would not grow it into one of the big conglomerates that I had worked for before, that we were going to keep it a family-run business and not make it into one of those things. And I was very happy to agree to that. So that's what we're doing, and that's how we treat our clients, is that we treat them like family. We know them by name, and we talk to them just like we're sitting at the kitchen table every day. And you'll hear me use that word clients all the time. We don't consider the people that we work for to be customers. We consider them to be clients. And so that's really, really important to us. So anyway, that's a little bit about me. I just wanted to make sure you know who you were talking to, and that I have the background that to present to you. So that's where we're at. Give me just a second here. Some of the things that we're planning on covering today. First of all, probably the most important, which is why it'll be one of the last things that we talk about, are the refrigerants in the AC systems that we're seeing every day. R22, as you know, was the old school stuff back in around 2010. We started moving over to 410A. And with the current administration running things, we are going to be pushing away from 410 now and moving into some new refrigerants, and we'll cover that in depth within the slideshow. SEER ratings, which is the efficiency ratings of HVAC systems. Everybody knows it as SEER. One of the more common, you'll see it as a 14 SEER or a 16 SEER these days. They go all the way up to 25 SEER. All of that's changing, and it will now be referred to as a SEER 2 rating, which is going to be hugely confusing to our clients, which is going to be awesome. Why not make it as confusing as possible? 90% efficient gas furnaces. We have not been mandated in the southern part of the U.S. To have these, but there's some changes that are coming, and we'll go over that as well. And one of the most important things that we always talk about is the registration of the systems. It drives me absolutely batty that nobody helps out our clients with these things. And so we'll talk about that as well. With that, let's just go ahead and we'll move on. Top 10 inspection items. For those of you who have seen me talk at some of the local places, some of this at the very beginning is going to look pretty familiar. I love talking to you guys about these items because we get called out all the time from homeowners that say, hey, I just had a home inspector look at my system and they told me to call you, and here's what they've said. And so here's some of the things that we see when we go out, and some of the things that we've seen that are done wrong. And I want to make sure that you guys are aware of what we see that's happening. So first and foremost is air filtration. We'll talk pretty specifically about the drain lines, the condensation drain lines for the systems. The refrigerant line sets, which is always an important one for you guys. The flue pipes are the exhaust pipes for the gas furnaces. Evaporator coils, why they're important, what they do, and what we typically see with these things. Differential pressures, pet peeve of mine. I'm for sure going to beat up on you guys about taking differential pressures or differential temperatures. Plenums, ductwork leakage, what the ductwork should look like versus what you typically see in a house these days. The blower wheel and the buildup that we see that accumulates on those things. Outdoor condensers and the size of the breakers, as well as the condenser coils for planning. So we'll be covering a whole lot of that. And just so you've got an idea. And Paul, we should probably talk to him about real quick. During this, if you've got questions, please make sure that you're putting those in. Paul can see them, I think, probably better than me. But as we get to moving through, we will stop and address some of those verbally as we're going through those categories. That way we don't have to go all the way back to the stuff that we covered an hour ago and try to remember what the heck it was that we were talking about. So we'll take questions as we go. So if you've got them, make sure you're clicking in on that Q&A tab up top and asking your questions. Paul, anything you want to say about that before we get really moving?
That's what I was going to say. It's in the Q&A box. Any questions, just type them in and we'll get around to answer them for you.
All right, sounds great. Sorry here. Ooh, excuse me. So let's start off with filtration. Two different types of filters that everybody knows about are the 1-inch thick filters that you'll see up in the either in the wall or usually on the ceiling, versus the media filtration cabinets that we're seeing lots of these days. Obviously, the media filtration cabinets are much, much better. You want to see that they're using the filters in those media cabinets. There's a MERV rating that's printed on the outside of that filter. MERV 11 is the most common version of that. You'll see, you don't see the big media filtration filters sold in HEB and some of the, you know, the more convenient places. Clients will either order them offline or they'll go down to Home Depot or Lowe's and pick them up. I hate the way that filters are marketed to our clients. They make these HEPA filters with like a MERV 1000 or whatever you want to call it, and tell them that it's good for your sinuses and it filtrates more out of the air. Yes, it absolutely does, but it also inhibits the airspeed and the airflow through that unit. If you get those super dense filters, it's very difficult for the furnace and for the blower assembly to pull that airflow through the unit. Now, it wasn't so much of a concern back in the day when we had PSC standard straight motors in our AC units, but nowadays, because of the efficiency ratings that are mandated on the industry, these new motors are variable speed components. They are ran by 24 volts. They're not direct. And so it's it can damage those motors very easily if they're struggling to get airflow through that unit. So you want to talk to your homeowners about that. Mark down what the MERV rating is on the filters that you see, and make sure that they understand that MERV 11 is probably the best. If you get anything over a MERV 11, you're really starting to flirt with the idea of inhibiting the airflow. I would love to tell you that you know, we expect our clients to change their filters, especially the small ones, every 30 days. But that's not going to happen. Let's just be realistic, right? And even the media filtration, the big 5-inch thick filters that are up in the attic space, we expect them to get changed out every 6 months. And to be honest with you, half the time that doesn't happen either. So you got to make sure that those filters are clean and that they're usable and that they're not using those incredibly dense filters in the unit. So take a look at that when you're looking at the system. If it is a new construction home or maybe a flip house that just got redone, pull the filter out and really look at it. We know that the walls in these houses typically get painted white or a version thereof of white. And I promise you that the painter who's painting the inside of the house is not going to turn the AC unit off. They're going to keep it running. And guess where all that spray goes to? It goes right up through the return and all over that filter. And while it looks like a super clean filter, yeah, I bet it does, because it just got painted white. And you're for sure not going to get any airflow through that. So make sure that you're looking for those. Check the system performance without the filter. When you guys are running these units, take a minute and pull the filter out and set it down on the ground or set it off to the side and close the grill back up and run it without the filter. If you're running it with a super dirty filter in there, of course it's not going to operate properly. And so we want to see the differential between that unit running with the filter versus without the filter. And then provide the homeowner with sizes. This is just being nice to your clients, right? Take a minute, write down the sizes and add that to your inspection report. This, for most people, this is a new home that they're getting ready to move into. And they don't know what those sizes are, especially if it's the media filters that are up in the attic space. I would rather we not have our clients crawling around in the attic anyway. And so if they have a 20 by 25 by 5, or sometimes if it's a big house with 3, 5, 8 systems on it, we've seen those, all of them can be different size filters. And so we need to make sure that they understand what those sizes are so they can have them on hand for us when we show up to do our biannual maintenance. Paul, do we have some questions we need to answer to?
We do. Someone asking, is there an airflow calculation for pleated filters and how much return air is needed for the variable speed motors?
Yeah, so variable speed motors require the same amount that we've always seen per tonnage. And let's get into that real quick, right? So for those of you who are older like me, you'll know that 12,000 BTUs used to be 1 ton, right? And so if we said that you had 3 tons of air conditioning, that was 36,000 BTUs. That is not the case these days. And so even if you go out to the outdoor unit and you're looking at the model number that's printed on the data plate and you see that 036, everybody still wants to call that a 3-ton unit. And that's great if we're talking to each other. But I will tell you now, there is not a 3-ton unit by any manufacturer these days that actually produces 36,000 BTUs worth of air conditioning. They're all very, very much depleted. And the reason that they're less is because of the efficiency standards that have been placed on the industry. So make sure you understand that. And in fact, we've been training our guys to stop using the words tonnage. We want to tell you how many BTUs is running through that unit. And so be careful of that, be careful. And you'll never know, you won't be able to know unless you're actually have access to AHRI and pull up the model numbers of those, of all 3 individual pieces of equipment before you can see what the actual BTU rating is. And so, but no, yes, there is some calculations to see how much airflow is needed for these filters, but it's not something that you want to concern yourself with. It's way too much information for the homeowner. Just notify them that, hey, MERV 11 is pretty much the standard. And it looks like, you know, you're running something that's way higher than that and very dense, and just educate, right? That's the whole idea, is to educate the homeowner on what they probably ought to be using versus what they are.
Chris, we got another question. They want me to ask you about the Honeywell filters you can buy most anywhere versus the Air type filters that the HVAC dealers supply.
Yeah, so we like Honeywell quite a bit. Honeywell, to me, makes the best stuff that's out there. Air, they don't market their products to the homeowner. They market their products to us, the HVAC professional, because they want us to have control over the homeowner and having them call us to order filters from us directly. That's their whole marketing campaign to AC companies, is if you put in Air equipment, they have to call you to get the replacement filters. They can't buy them online and they can't get them anywhere else. I understand that from a business perspective, but I'm not trying to hold my clients hostage, and so we don't do that, or at least we don't. I know there are several companies that do. If you see the Air filters, you may want to talk to your client about getting an AC company and signing up on one of their programs to where they're coming out and doing biannual maintenance, and make sure that they deal with Air. But personally, I like the Honeywell stuff better.
Yeah, another question. It says new homes don't have filters at the grills. They're usually at the unit in the attic. Please discuss air filter ducts that don't have filters at the return grills, resulting in filthy air return flex ducts.
Well, and that's true. And usually the return air going to a system, you'll see it'll be a return air plenum going up first. And then sometimes, depending on where that return air is at versus how far away the system is, you're right, they'll run a duct over to it. It does get that duct very, very dirty. It's going to accumulate over time. Those ducts tend to have some static electricity that runs through them when you get airflow going through. And so that static electricity will cause dust and dander and all types of stuff to cling to it. And so, yes, you might want to talk to your clients about the fact that the media cabinet is up in the attic versus there being a filter downstairs somewhere, and that they want to get their return air ducts cleaned maybe once every year or so, maybe every 2 years. It depends on the environment, right? If you've got a bunch of animals in the house and or children that are running in and out of the house all the time, you might want to have it cleaned more often. And so you can kind of go from there and have that conversation.
Good.
But one important thing to note, we do see sometimes to where they have the media cabinet in the attic and they still have the grill in the ceiling or in the wall, and we'll see them running a filter there as well as another filter in the attic. We highly don't recommend that. Pick one and use that one, but don't use both. You're double filtering the air, and again, you're going to inhibit the airflow through that unit.
Interesting. Okay, so is there an acceptable static pressure reading across the clean new filter?
Static pressure, typically on most systems, we're looking for about 6 pounds, but again, that's something that's going to be very hard for you guys to measure. It's way over and above anything that you need to be looking for your clients. You shouldn't be protruding into the cabinet spaces anyway. And so yes, there is, but no, it's not anything that a home inspector ought to be looking for or trying to measure.
Okay, I had one more here. It says, how about clients who replace their April air with box filters?
So they do make, and I'm assuming Honeywell is the one that put them out. They do make a retrofit system that you can take an April air box, retrofit it with these rails down at the bottom and at the top, and you can use the Honeywell filters in those boxes or in those cases versus having to order the April air filters. In that case, fantastic, no worries there. But if they're pulling out the expensive April air filter and just trying to cram a little 1-inch thick filter, it's never going to seal properly, and you're going to get a lot of bypass air across that system, and you're going to end up with a really dirty AC system. So highly don't recommend it. If you're going to have a media filter, pick one and use that, but use the proper filter for box.
Okay, good. That's all the questions we've got right now. So we'll let you keep going, Chris. Good job.
All right. Thank you, sir. HVAC drain lines, condensation drain lines. How do I get started on this? Blowout valves are a must. And if you look over on the right-hand side of the picture there, it says quick blast. That's your blowout isolation valve. What this does is this should be one of the first things that you see coming out of the evaporator coil is this blowout valve. This allows us to turn that valve to the off position or to the closed position so that we can get up in the attic space and use nitrogen, compressed nitrogen, to blow out the condensation drain line when it's clogged. If you don't have that blowout valve, the pressure from your nitrogen going through that line doesn't go, it's going to carry the path of least resistance. It's going to go back towards the evaporator coil. And literally you're just blowing water into your evaporator coil. So these things are a must. If you don't have them, I would highly recommend that we talk to your clients about having them installed by a professional. Float switches, and you'll see two different types pictured here. The safety switch, which is typically an inline safety switch for the condensation drain line, and then the one to the left, which is usually hanging on an emergency drain pan somewhere. This is cheap insurance to make sure that you don't end up with a waterfall coming through your ceiling in the living room one day. They're less than $100 to have installed. And like I said, again, it's just cheap insurance. If you do not see these on your condensation drain lines, I highly recommend that you call that out and talk to your homeowners about it. Depending on what city you're in or where you're located at, these are actually by code, you got to have them installed. Now, if you're out in the county or you're in some other places, you know, there's no such thing. Nobody's looking at them. And so, but anyway, they should be installed. We recommend 2. The code is usually 1, but you never know if one of them's going to fail, and it's always better to have a backup, right? Mr. Murphy always loves to test you and see if he can make something go wrong for you. Drain lines are tied into the lavatory sinks. A lot of people don't understand this. Please inform your homeowners that, at least in the Houston area where we are, the condensation drain lines typically go down a wall and will tie into a lavatory sink. If you open up the cabinet, you'll see what looks like a black water hose that's coming out of the wall, and that ties into the sink, usually just up above the P-trap. Make sure they understand that, and that if their bathroom sink starts to back up or starts to drain slowly, that it's usually because of the air conditioner, and that can cause their AC drain to back up and then end up having those types of problems up in the attic space. And so I hate this, by the way, about the Houston area where I'm from. You weren't allowed to do this. We used to have to run them directly to the outside. It was a big no-no to tie your AC drain into the rest of the household plumbing, because AC drains create a very specific type of sludge that is unaffected by Drano and all of the common household products that you would pour down a drain to try and get it to break up. That sludge is unaffected by that. By the way, big old wives' tale to crawl up in the attic and pour bleach down the drain line. You're not helping anything. You might as well just save that stuff for your laundry. So that's an old wives' tale. If you hear somebody say that, yeah, I mean, you can do it, I guess, if you want to, but it's not going to help anything as far as your drain line is concerned. So, also with drain lines, air handlers, electric air handlers, and gas furnaces are not the same thing, right? So, and let's talk about that. When you have a gas furnace assembly, and then you have the evaporator coil after the gas furnace assembly. So the furnace is pulling the air in, it goes across the heater, and then is pushed across the evaporator coil. In an air handler, it's the opposite. You have the evaporator coil first, and then the fan assembly. So the fan assembly is pulling that airflow across that evaporator coil. You wouldn't think that would make a huge difference, but it absolutely does. PTraps are not mandated for gas furnaces. You don't have to have one. It will drain without it. All you need to do is come off that evaporator coil and take it to where you want it. Now, we typically install them anyway, because that leaves us a nice little breather tube and a nice little place for us to get up in the attic space and clear the drain line. And so it works out great. So we recommend them, but it's not mandated. On an electric air handler assembly, though, you'll see the picture that's showing there. That's literally out of the installation manual for an electric air handler. You have to have a P-trap, period, dot. Otherwise, it will not drain. It's not going to. All of that, it creates a negative pressure within that coil assembly cabinet, and it will not drain. You will end up with a water leak every single time. In the attic space where the unit is installed, you will usually find the installation instructions laying around up there somewhere. Most installers are trained to leave them with the unit for several reasons. First of all, because it has all the wiring diagrams, which makes it nice if you're a technician and they're trying to work on something. The wiring diagrams are sitting there available for you, but you'll see this on the air handlers. Some of the air handlers, especially Rheem, I know for sure, actually has a nice little big sticker that goes on the front of the cabinet that shows a picture of this and how it needs to be set up so that it will drain properly. So, any questions, Paul, on drain lines? Have you seen anything?
Yes, we had a couple of them. One says, as a technician, I've installed new digital thermostats that remind homeowners to replace air filters and humidifier pads. Do you recommend these?
They're nice if they're programmed correctly. So if they're using the little 1-inch filters, you need to set it up to remind them every 30 days. If they're using the big media cabinets, you need to set it up so that it reminds them every 6 months. One of the biggest calls that we get all the time is a homeowner saying, how do I get this off my screen? So it's nice that it reminds them to change the filter, but they have a hard time figuring out how to get the little notification off of their screen. So if you're seeing those, again, we should be leaving the homeowner manual with the thermostat so they can go back and look at it. A thing about thermostats, if you pull it off of the base, off of the wall, on the back, there should be a model number. Typically, at least Honeywell does. And if you just punch that number into Google, it'll usually bring up the homeowner's manual and show you how to reprogram that kind of stuff.
Good point.
But yes, we'd like
a couple other questions for you, Chris.
Sure.
So what's the cause of thumping in the sink drain where the condensate line drains into it?
Yeah, and so we were talking about how we are using P-traps in the attic on gas furnaces, even though we don't have to. And that's one of the major reasons why. If you have a P-trap up in the attic space, it prevents that airflow. Remember, this is not a drain line like you would see in plumbing. In plumbing, drain lines are set up so that the water follows gravity, right? It's gravity fed. you got to remember that this drain line is going to be air pressurized because of the airflow that's going through the unit. You've got air flowing through that drain line as well. And so if you don't have a P-trap to stop that airflow up in the attic, the only place that it has to go is down the wall and into the sink. And so typically when you're hearing that thumping noise in the sink, it's the airflow going through that drain line that's causing the water in that P-trap at the lavatory sink to start bouncing around. And so usually it's because there's no P-trap up in the attic.
Okay, good. Another one comments that doing pre-drywall inspections, having the AC primary drain line installed entirely inside the wall to the laundry room drain that will totally be concealed inside the wall.
Yeah, that's true. We've seen it. It's wrong, right? Because there's no way to get to it when we have to, and I promise we're going to have to at some point. And so we're going to end up cutting sheetrock and making an access panel for it at some point down the road. I mean, yeah, once again, talk here. Yeah, no surprise. But it's something that I would bring up to our clients for sure and talk to them about and just tell them, hey, you know, typically these are ran to lavatory sinks. Don't know why they decided to run it to the laundry room, but there's no access to it. And I promise an AC guy's going to have to get to it to clean it out at some point.
So Chris, is there a code related to that installation?
No, sir, not that I'm aware of. Basically it says that it needs to be ran to a drain. It doesn't really reference where. So to be honest, once again, I like to see them ran outside. But no, sir, not that I'm aware that it doesn't call out that it has to be ran to a laboratory. It just
okay, another one on your diagram here with the vent pipe sticking up. Does that need to be capped?
With an air handler, yes. With a gas furnace, no. In fact, if you have a P-trap on a gas furnace and you do cap it, you'll stop it from draining. Again, it creates a negative pressure effect and that becomes a problem. So no, on a gas furnace, do not. I know it's always fun to be standing next to it and you get that cold air rushing up your leg and you're wondering where the air leak is from. That little bit of air is not going to hurt anything. You're not air conditioning the attic space. Don't cap it when it's a gas furnace.
Okay, good point. All right, one more question here. It says in the last slide, does 1 through 3 only apply when the units are in the attic? Said I'm in an area where they are in the basements or crawl space.
Give me a second. No, all of that still applies. And so, yes, you can put them in a crawl space, you can put them in a closet, but all of these items are still the same. You still have to have some place for that condensation to go. And yes, we fully expect that these are used. Now, I'm with you. If it's in a crawl space under the house and it starts to leak condensation all over the place, yeah, I'm not going to ruin sheetrock and I'm probably not going to ruin the floor, but that condensation is accumulating inside of the AC system and I'm ruining the insulation. I'm ruining the heat exchanger. Like there's all kinds of other problems. So I would rather have these safety switches that turn the unit off when it sees that the drain lines are backed up versus having a condensation problem continue to accumulate. And so so the short answer is yes, still applies.
Okay, one more question before we go forward on it. It says, I've been seeing more and more of the safety.
Was that it, Paul?
Yeah, one more. Says, I've been seeing more and more safety switch without an actual condensate drain. Says he's reporting as a defect. Is he correct on that?
No. I hate it. Don't get me wrong. There should, and I think what he's referring to is that there should be an emergency drain line that comes out of the evaporator coil and goes to the outside of the house. Typically, it's located over a window, so that hopefully somebody's looking out the window and sees that there's a drip, and it notifies somebody that, hey, I need to figure out what that is. Depending on where you're at again and what the code's telling you, you should have a drain line. And I have not seen newer homes built without an emergency drain line, but I have seen in some of the older homes, what they're doing is instead of having an emergency drain line, they're installing those safety switches directly to the evaporator coil. And if the water starts to accumulate right there, then it turns the unit off. I guess that's better than not having anything. And in a lot of older homes, we've seen that as well. But it should have, per code, an emergency drain line going to the outside, and it does have to be located either over a door or over a window.
Okay, good. That's the question for right now. So,
all right. So our favorite part, drain lines and drain lines, HVAC, refrigerant lines, and the insulation. This is the most common thing that I ever see on an inspector's report, is that the insulation for the copper line going to the unit, coming out of the wall to the outdoor condenser, is old and deteriorated and should be replaced. Yes, that's true. It needs to be replaced. Is it going to affect the performance of that AC unit? Probably not. Probably not at all. Most of those line sets coming out of the wall are what? 2 feet at the most, unless it's going, down a wall somewhere. That little bit of exposure to the outdoor ambient temperature is not going to hurt anything. Now, by code, it's supposed to be insulated. And by code these days, not only insulated, but insulated with the new UV protected, blah, 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 so that it won't deteriorate. Oh, by the way, somebody made $1 billion off of that, and it wasn't me. I'm sad that I wasn't the guy who invented that. It's just another thing, right? And yes, it needs to be insulated per code. Now, in the attic space, whole other deal. Yes, it needs to be insulated. It has to be insulated. That is cold refrigerant going up to or coming back out of that coil, and it needs to be insulated or it will condensate. Typically, the mandate is at least 2 sticks, which is 12 feet, but we like to see it insulated all the way over to where it drops down the wall before it goes outside. And in fact, we like to see it insulated inside the wall, and should be, but sometimes you don't get that. Sometimes they won't do it at all. So, but yes, if you don't see it insulated, or if that insulation specifically in the attic space or in the wall space doesn't look right, you need to have that called out immediately.
Chris, got another question on the refrigerant line while you're on that subject. What about in the wall cavities where they run the refrigerant line down to the condenser up to the attic or whatever? I know the code says you have to have some type of vibration damper on that line. Can you explain that a little bit to them?
Yeah, and that is something that we get a lot of calls about, is that, hey, every time my outdoor unit comes on, I hear a vibration, and it's usually in the wall space. And yes, there should be a vibration damper in there. They typically secure it to the 2x4s going down the wall cavity, and which is why they insulate the lines going down. Not only it's kind of killing 2 birds with 1 stone, right? Yes, I insulated the line, which means you won't get a condensation problem. But now that I've also got it strapped to the 2x4 that's sitting next to it, that insulation works as a vibration damper. And so they're killing 2 birds with 1 stone there, and I don't mind it. But that's exactly what you ought to see. And it is important. We see it all the time. We've gotten a lot of phone calls where that line set somehow has come unsecured inside of a wall cavity, and every time that outdoor unit comes on, it starts bouncing around. It seems like it's always running down the wall in the master bedroom too, which always seems to be interesting.
Northest place in the house, I got to notice.
Right, and they always position the master bedroom to be the furthest room away from the AC unit, which means it gets the worst airflow. I don't understand that either, but that tends to be the case. So
now, how do you recommend stopping that vibration? What is your recommendation?
If you have a vibration problem, the only thing you can, the first thing that we're going to try is to go to the outdoor unit and try and put some tension on that line and see if we can get it to stop vibrating. Is that the proper way to do it? No, but it's the cheapest. because the next step is to start cutting sheetrock and get our hands in there so that we can gain access to the line set and re-secure that line to the wall properly. Typically, it's the suction side line that we see that's insulated, but the head side pressure line is not insulated, right? And so usually what we'll find is that that's the one that's banging on something. Is it's the pressure line coming from the unit up to the coil, which is the small 3/8 inch line, by the way, not the big 3/4 or 7/8. So that's usually the culprit is the smaller line.
So during a pre-drywall inspection, what would you suggest that inspectors should look for as a vibration damper on those lines?
Yes, and so we've seen them done a lot of different ways. I've literally seen them just zip tied to the 2x4. We like to see the nice little clamps that are specifically made for those line sets to go and clamp them to the wall. I don't know that there's a code that's more along the lines of the framer that did those versus us, but we like to see those clamps, and I'm sure all of you have seen the ones that I'm talking about, right? They're made very specifically for those line sets to get secured to the walls.
Yeah, I know a lot of times during a pre-drywall, if you walk up and just grab those lines, they shake tremendously. And when they
Yeah.
shake like that, you know they're not secured enough to stop the vibration of it. So
Yes, sir. Yep,
and the
absolutely.
builders always want to know, well, how are we supposed to do it? You know, how do we stop it? And it's like you said,
They make a clamp. Yeah, there's a clamp that's specifically designed, and they make them in several different sizes because we'll have 7/8 or 3/4 and 3/8 and different size line sets. But there's a clamp that you can buy at the HVAC supply houses that's specifically designed to clamp that line set to a 2x4.
exactly. I saw one just last week that they really impressed me with it because they had taken 2x4s, laid them on their side and attached between the wall studs, and then took those clamps and clamped it to it in two different spots. That
Yes,
pipe
sir.
didn't move at all.
No, they won't shake at all after that. And any more questions about the line set, sir?
No, that's all we got right now.
All right. Flue pipes. Flue pipes. How can I start talking about this? First of all, they've got to be connected, and silver tape is not connecting. That's not appropriate. There's several different types of manufacturers of flue pipes, and so what we'll see in a lot of the older houses is that they started off with one, maybe they changed the unit out, and the guys that installed the new unit didn't have the same type of manufacturer, so they'll run a portion of new pipe up to the unit, up to the old one, and then try to seal it in some way, shape, form, or fashion. And that's not appropriate, right? It should be the same type. It should be locked in together. These things fit together like Lego pieces on purpose, and it should be continuous from the unit and through the roof. If you look at the left picture, that's an old style type vent going through the roof line, and they just ran the exhaust up to the vent. We see that all the time, and it's not appropriate. It's got to protrude through the roof and through the flashing. No tape, no sealants. You'll see them use hard cast, like you use on ductwork to try and seal these things. I've seen spray foam all over these things. All of that stuff is flammable. The heat's going to tear, like it's just not appropriate. So please look in for that. Same size pipe all the way through. I've seen them run 3-inch pipe up to one spot and then move to 4-inch pipe, and that's not appropriate. Now, with that being said, certain manufacturers, for instance, Rheem, they're coming out of the top of their unit with 3-inch pipe, and that's fine. If you want to run 3-inch pipe all the way through, that's great, because that's what that unit's designed for. In most cases, though, what we'll see is a 3 to 4 increaser right at the top of the furnace to increase it to the 4-inch pipe that's usually already existing in a change out unit where you're putting a new unit in. So, but whatever you run the same size pipe all the way through. It must be 12 inches from the furnace before the first bend. If you look at the installation instructions of furnaces these days, especially when going horizontal. So we started laying our furnaces horizontal these days instead of having them vertical. the proper way to install that is that when you install that furnace in a horizontal position, you're supposed to take the inducer motor completely off the unit, turn it to the side, reinstall it, and then there's a knockout in the side of the furnace, which is now the top because you laid it horizontally, and that's where you're supposed to take the exhaust now, is through the side of the furnace and going straight up. But nobody does that. What you see is they lay that furnace down on its side and they run they immediately install a 90-degree elbow right there, which by the way is right in front of the evaporator coil and is a major pain in the butt to access anything. But they'll put a 90-degree elbow and then go straight up through the roof line, and that is inappropriate because you can't get enough airflow through that 90-degree elbow. You got to remember that the exhaust gases are not being pushed out of the furnace. You have an exhaust gas inducer motor, but it induces the gas to just begin to move upwards. And after that, you know, these exhaust gases are lighter than air and they go straight up through the roof line, but it's not a pressurized pipe. And so you've got to have at least a 12-inch straight run out of there before you go to any 90-degree elbow. And we see that as a problem all the time. Also, if you look at the second picture, the one in the middle, if it looks like your client's got a brand new roof, most of the time that's what you're going to see. The roofers came in there, they put the new roof down and they knocked the vent pipe loose, and it's usually just sitting there dangling. The third picture off to the right is a 90% gas furnace, and I told you we're going to talk in depth about those here in just a little bit. Those pipes, that's your inlet and your outlet pipes. They're usually 2-inch PVC, and in Texas you're going to start seeing this a lot more, so we're going to have to get familiar with them. Paul, we got any questions?
Yes, we do. We've got one that says, on the air handler in question, your bottom right picture showed the secondary drain pipe be capped. Said it ran across these independently with an isolated trap. Do you recommend this as well?
And I'm sorry, are we talking about on the slide that we're on currently?
He doesn't tell me that, but I believe that's what he's talking about.
I think he might be talking about the previous one. Oh, this one is probably what he's talking about. So yes, on this picture here, he's got the emergency drain line that comes off and then goes up as a breather. And they've got an emergency drain pan underneath it with the emergency drain line going out. This is okay. It's not my preference. Don't get me wrong. I would much rather see the emergency drain line coming directly out of the coil and then going to the outside. But we always run this off the emergency drain pan. So typically what we'll see is that it comes off of the coil, ties into the same line for the emergency drain pan, so that no matter if the water gets in the pan or doesn't, it's still ported to the outside of the house. Yes, this is okay, but no, it's not my preference. You'll also notice, by the way, that it is insulated, right? And again, we're asking for at least 2 sticks on the condensation drain line. Otherwise, it will begin to condensate as well. So correct. Thank you for pointing that out for me. I didn't cover that before. Anything else there, Paul?
I've got one somebody asked about. Let me go back to his question here. I think I may have missed it. Let me back up here so I can get back. It says, where to go? Well, I lost it. He's responded. He asked about a high loop. And then he said that's the line that comes from the attic and extends to the elevated higher than the coil prior to connecting the evaporator coil, similar to a dishwasher drain.
We see the loops in refrigerant lines when it is an elevated position. He's right. So, and it's very specific in the installation instructions, depending on the manufacturer, about how high up you're pushing that refrigerant. In many cases, you have to have that loop in it to basically create a PTrap. in the refrigerant line so that the oils within the refrigerant line don't flood the coil. But it's very specific based upon manufacturer and the length of those lines and how far up they're going. So if you see it, it was done on purpose and probably needs to be done. But it would be very difficult for a home inspector to look at a unit and say, no, that should have been done, because you're not going to know the specifics of the system and what was called out in the installation instructions, if that makes sense.
Okay. Got another question. Do you recommend the condensate breather be mounted above the pan?
Yes, absolutely. Just like that one that we just saw, which is right here, right? And so he comes in with a small P-trap. By the way, this is a run trap, which I don't like, but it's there. At least he's got some kind of a trap. And then a little bit after that, you'll see the breather tube. That's more than just a breather tube. It's mainly there for the clean out, so that we can go in there and clean out a drain line. But what you don't see here is everything that we were talking about before, right? There's no blowout valve. There's no cutoff switches. There's none of that. And it all should have been done in this case.
Okay, one other question. It says, for vent pipes on 90% efficiency units, said I inspected one that had a PVC T at the roof, but it wasn't secured. I assume it was meant to keep rain moisture from getting into the air intake. I called it out as a defect since it wasn't glued. How should I have called that?
No, that's true. Everything should be glued, right? If it's PVC, it gets glued together. It never just sits there up on top. And you're right. It was there specifically to keep rain and water out of that.
Okay, that's all the question I've got, Chris.
All right, sir. All right, evaporator coils. Yes, this is an evaporator coil, and it looks like it's got a coat on it. Dirty evaporator coils are the most common problem that we ever see on an AC system. Anything that it ever makes past the air filtration is going to get caught in the evaporator coil. This is where condensation happens. This is where it's created. I'm taking warm air out of the house and passing it across a 40-degree evaporator coil, and condensation is going to happen. So any dust, pet dander, anything that's running through and gets past that air filter is going to get caught on this coil. And this is what it looks like afterwards. Once I start getting that coat across this evaporator coil and I can't get airflow through it, the next thing that starts happening is it starts to ice over. We've seen evaporator coils that were iced over so badly that the case of the coil was bulging out from the amount of ice that was on it. It's ridiculous at how quickly they will ice over and how much they will ice over, and how it's crazy that a homeowner thinks that, hey, my AC is not working, let me call somebody, but then they never think to turn the dang thing off, right? Like, if you're going down the highway in your car and the engine starts making some crazy noises and banging around and you got steam rolling out of the hood, you usually turn it off, but nobody does that with an air conditioner for some reason. So it's crazy. But yes, if you can get a visual on the evaporator coil, then you should take a look at it, and look at it specifically for cleanliness and for corrosion. And when I say corrosion, we're talking about visible rust and things of that nature. One of the biggest problems that we have had in the past probably 5 years or more in the industry is that the manufacturers started producing evaporator coils with very, very thin copper tubing. So the walls of the copper tubing that make up these coils were made with very thin copper. Problem with that is that you get formicary corrosion. Formicary corrosion is new to the industry. Back in the day when we built houses, we built it with real wood, right? Real components. Today, these houses are full of chemicals when they're built. Everything's held together with glues. You've got all types of chemicals in the carpet, all types of chemical. It's just, it is a crazy mix of chemicals in a brand new home. Every time that AC unit comes on, those chemicals get pulled into the AC system. And guess where they stop at? Right there at that evaporator coil, just like we discussed. it's a wet condition, right? And so as I'm pulling that air through there, those chemicals are going to get deposited on that copper tubing, and it's a dark, damp environment, and it's going to start corroding that copper tubing very quickly. So when they got called out for doing that, there was a major class action lawsuit because that formicary corrosion started eating through the copper tubing, and we got mass people calling in about evaporator coil leaks. And man, it's during the summertime, we will probably change 5 evaporator coils a week, just for this issue. And it's ridiculous. We start seeing them between the 3 to 5 year mark, which is awesome because the manufacturer's warranty is typically only 5 years, and they're going bad left and right. And so when you're inspecting these units, you want to check it for cleanliness and you want to look at corrosion. The only formicary corrosion that you're going to be able to visually see is going to be that green looking stuff that you would see on copper. This, by the way, is the reason that you're seeing evaporator coils these days made out of aluminum, 100% aluminum. You'll only see a very small portion of the copper where it first initiates, and then after that, it turns into a solid aluminum evaporator coil. According to the manufacturers, this is the way that they're combating formicary corrosion, and that it doesn't work that well against aluminum as it does against copper. I guess we'll see here in about 5 years. But supposedly this is their answer to formicary corrosion and all the evaporator coil problems that we've had in the last several years. So, any questions, sir?
No question at this stage.
All right. Move on to the next. Differential temperatures again, and I said this once before already. This is my pet peeve with everybody in this industry. Please, if you are walking around somebody's home with one of them little radar guns and you're taking the temperatures at the vents in the individual rooms, please take that thing outside and throw it away. It is not the way to take differential temperatures on an HVAC system. If you'll see the diagram here, you'll see that there is a return air plenum and a supply air plenum. You've got to take your temperatures there. You cannot take it down inside the individual rooms. Now listen, I'll say that with a small caveat. If you go into one room and the airflow coming out of there is 60 degrees, and in all the other rooms, the airflow coming out of there is 45 degrees, well, then obviously there's an air issue for the one room that's at 60 versus all the others that are at 45, probably the master bedroom. But so in that case, I understand why you're taking temperatures at all the different vents. That makes sense. But when you're calling it out as a differential temperature problem with an HVAC system, this is how you have to take the temps. We prefer that it be an actual probe that goes through the plenum. I've heard that InterNACHI doesn't want you guys to actually probe into that. If you can't, try and do it at the duct that is as close to the inlet as possible, and the first duct that's as close to the supply plenum as possible. You want to get those temperatures at the unit, not at the individual rooms. And that tells us what the actual performance of the system is. And again, you want to do this without a return air filter in the unit. You want to take this temperature without a return air filter in the unit. Take it at the supply and at the return.
Yeah, actually, Chris, that's one of the things that our licensing agency here in Texas requires us to do, is to take the closest register furthest from the return, take the return temperature, then the furthest register from that, and take the difference. And the 15 to 20, some of them's 14 to 21, it varies, but that's how they do it, tell us to do it, and to take temperature readings in every room. So that's where some of that comes from. And though the state knows as well as we do, that's not the most accurate method of doing it. It's just giving us some type of ballpark, because as home inspectors, we don't get as in depth as what you guys do as an air conditioning contractor.
Sure. And I probably shouldn't complain, because what that results in is a whole lot of telephone calls to us saying, hey, I had a home inspector and he said that the differential temp was only 12 degrees, and then when we come out, I've got an 18-degree differential temp at the unit. So I probably shouldn't complain too much because it does keep our guys busy. But in most cases, what we find is that what you're calling out as a differential temperature problem typically does not turn into that. So be cognizant that if you're measuring it at one unit, at a room down the ways versus, where it should be done, that you're probably going to be off. So.
Correct.
All right.
Okay, let me see if I got any questions. Well, I've got you, Paul's there.
Yes, sir.
Someone says it's their understanding correct, designates the delta T at 15 to 22. That's correct. That's what the standard is for Texas inspector. Of course, we've got others on here are not in Texas. They're from all across the country here. So,
yes,
you have to do whatever your state requires or your licensing or the InterNACHI standards.
And most AC techs will tell you that we expect it to be 18 to 20. Our guidelines are going to be a lot more stringent, and we don't want to see that more than an 18 to 20 degree differential. If it's lower than that, we want to see what's happening.
All right, good. That's all the question comments.
All right, sir. Let me get set up here. All right, HVAC ductwork. First of all, everybody should understand it needs to be sealed at every connection point. It doesn't matter where it's at. Might be on a subplenum way across on the other side of the attic. It may be where they tied two bags of ductwork together, but it should be sealed everywhere. If there's a connection, it needs to have hard mastic sealed everywhere. It cannot be crushed, and you'll see off to the right, the picture to the right, to where they've been shoved through some of the rafters. I don't know what they're thinking. If it's a 10-inch duct and now I've crushed it down to 7 inches, there's going to be an airflow problem, right? So you can't crush these ducts. It's just not going to work like that. Also, you want the ductwork to be as straight as possible. I've seen guys who installed ductwork and they took the most circuitous route between point A to point B that they possibly could have, and there's nothing straight about the duct at all. Every time there's a bend, even a slight bend in a piece of ductwork, it slows down the airflow. I mean, that's just, that's obvious common sense. And so I understand you can't always make a straight run between A and B, but we want to do it as efficiently as possible. And every time there's a turn or a compression in that duct, it slows down the airflow. It makes it very difficult to get airflow from point A to point B. Hung from the rafters. Do not have ductwork laying on top of the ceiling joists. It's the temperature differential will cause condensation inside the duct as well as on the outside of the duct. And so I get it, we see it all the time to where there's just not enough space. And so you do what you can, but as much as you possibly can, these ducts should not be laying on top of insulation in the attic space. It will create a mold problem, I promise. And so you've got to take that into account. The center picture is the most important. This is that old gray ductwork that came out, I think, when I was about 16 years old. And they touted it as the best stuff that was ever going to be made. If you get anywhere near this and just run your hand across it, the outside plastic just falls apart and you see nothing but insulation. This was the worst stuff ever. So if you see that gray ductwork in an attic space somewhere, you need to start talking to your homeowners about calling an HVAC guy to come in and inspect that ductwork before it falls apart on them. It's the worst stuff ever.
It does fall apart, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, a lot of times you're talking about ducts. A lot of times I see these ducts where the installers of these things will take it and, like you're talking about, shove it into spaces that they have to actually decrease the size of that duct by pinching it. But isn't there some type of limitation as far as how much the bend can actually be?
No. Nothing from an HVAC perspective that says they can't. I mean, you can bend it into a 90-degree turn if you have to. The proper method for doing that is to run a 90-degree metal elbow inside the duct so that it has an actual nice degree radius going across to be able to make that 90-degree turn. But once again, anytime you turn that airflow, it slows it down. And the most that we always, the ducts that we see the most turns in is going to be the ones that are the furthest away, which is almost always, again, the master bedroom. I don't know why. But they twist and turn that duct everywhere. And by the time it gets over to where it should be, it's slowed way down. There's a CFM chart that you can pull up on Google. Just Google HVAC duct CFM, and that's the amount of airflow that should be going through that size duct. And you're really decreasing the amount of CFM that's going through that duct to that particular room. And it's not hard to find. As soon as they say, hey, this room's always hotter, or hey, this room's always colder, it's usually because we go up in the attic and find that the duct's either crushed or pinched, or they just ran it in some crazy space with 58 turns before it gets to where it should be. Yeah, and so ductwork layout is a pet peeve of mine. But remember, in new construction, the guys that are running the ductwork typically are the cheapest guys that the builder could hire. And I'm not going to lie, half the time they picked them up that morning at Home Depot. And there's an actual AC guy there, but they're just general labor workers that are running that ductwork from A to B. Half the time they're not even in the HVAC industry. They're just general labor guys.
Well,
And
that
so
makes a lot of sense, Chris.
that's why we see so many problems with the ductwork design.
Yeah, we see it with the straps they hold these ducts up with, and those straps pinch the ducts in about 50% space.
Yep.
And you think, what good is this doing if you're restricting airflow?
It's not. So anyway, just something else to look for, especially that gray ductwork. I hate that stuff. Any questions there, sir?
Someone says, what standards used for ductwork installation?
There isn't one. To be honest with you, especially in new construction, the design plans for the home is going to call out the size of the AC system that should be installed, but there's nothing that tells them where to run the ducts, how to run the ducts, what size ducts to run. There's nothing there. And so it requires an AC professional to go in and do a room by room heat load calculation to decide how much airflow needs to go to that room, what size duct run it's going to take to get it over there, and still maintaining the right amount of static pressure to be able to force the airflow throughout the entire home to where it should be. Is that done on any new construction home? No. Literally, they just leave it up to the guys that are throwing it up in the attic, and they do it the way they've always done it, however they were taught to do it by whoever it was that taught them. And that's why we always see ductwork design layout problems. So.
Okay, one other question is, don't they have duct hangers where you can suspend them from the trusses?
Not typically in a residential setting. What you'll see is exactly what you just talked about, Paul, which is that fabric. It looks like a roll of tape, but it's a fabric that gets stapled to a rafter, and then they run the ductwork across it, and then they staple the other end to a rafter, and it's basically hanging from that fabric tape, which is fine as long as you do it right. It's not fine when there's so much stuff hanging on there that it starts to pinch or crush the duct. By the way, you can't have these ducts touching each other either. You got two different supply ducts. On the return side, it's not a problem, but on the supply side, if you've got cold air running through two different ducts and they're touching each other, they will condensate in between those ducts and start to cause an issue. And so any place where there are two ducts that are touching, they need to be separated by at least 1 inch of some type of insulation, whether that be batting insulation, or sometimes we'll see the fiberglass ductboard used as well. But you've got to separate those ducts by at least 1 inch. Otherwise, they will condensate.
Okay, let's see. I got a couple of questions somebody put in a different box. They just handed over to me. It says, what if the ductwork is leaking into rooms? I don't know if he's talking about at the register grill itself or what, but
probably at the register. So what we see is that when they installed the boxes that are above the ceiling, the sheetrock ceiling, they didn't seal the gap, right? And so when they go to install that box, they're supposed to put down a bead of silicone and then push the box on top of that bead of silicone and then put the register on from the bottom. A lot of times they skip the step of putting the bead of silicone. And so now what you've got is cold air coming through there, mixing with the hot air that's in the attic. And you'll get a lot of mold and mildew problems that show up on your ceiling or around that grill. And that's usually the cause of it.
Okay, another one says, let's see, what's the name of the gray ductwork that's bad? The one you had in the middle picture.
Oh, man, forgive me. I don't remember the name of the manufacturer, but you'll see it.
Old piece of ductwork, right?
Yes, you'll see it. It's the only stuff that's gray.
Usually it's coming apart.
And on 90% of the time, it's just falling apart. Yes, you're absolutely correct. The types that I hate to see are the ones to where it's a 2-story home. Because yeah, I can replace the stuff that's in the attic, but the stuff that's going down the wall, that's going down the chase to the first floor, I can't get to any of that unless we start ripping sheetrock, and that's a whole lot of sheetrock to rip out. Wow. Not that we haven't done it, but it's sad to see.
Yeah, that's the only correction for that's just replace the duct. So
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, I had another one said the silver outer insulation is not sufficient, or should there still be an inch separation?
No, it is not fit. It is not sufficient, and there still has to be an inch of 1 inch of separation between any of those ducts. That silver outside lining, honestly, the only reason it's there is to hold the insulation together on the inside. It provides a little bit of radiant barrier for the duct, but not so much. It's just there to hold everything together. 1 inch of separation between any supply air ducts, not return, because we're not dealing with conditioned air at that point. But on the supply ducts, they cannot touch each other.
Okay, good. So when you have a spray foam attic, the ducts, does it matter if they lay on the attic floor at that stage?
Oh man, you guys are pushing all my buttons today. So first of all, I hate spray foam. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. You want to know why I hate it? Go take your igloo cooler, right, and put just a little tiny bit of water in it, and then throw it out in your garage and leave it there for about a week, and then come back and open it and see why I hate spray foam insulation. You're basically turning your house into an igloo cooler. And if you can't get enough airflow from the outside, fresh air from the outside, you're going to end up with massive problems. Not so much from a custom home design. Custom home designers, they do the right thing. They have people that design how this house is going to breathe properly. It's when you get an existing 10-year-old house to where somebody came around and talked them into spray foam in the attic, man, it creates a lot of problem. So 2 answers to this question. First, properly done custom home to where the entire house is spray foamed, the walls, the attic, everything, then yes, I don't care if I do not care if the ducts are running across the top of the ceiling, because there's no insulation there anyway, right? It's just open. But you better make sure that there's supply air going into that attic space. So you have to have supply. It now becomes a conditioned air space, just like the rest of the house. So you have to have supply air now cooling that attic space. So make sure you're looking for that as well. In an existing home, to where somebody's gotten into the attic and spray foamed the just the roof line, no, I don't want ductwork running across the ceiling at that point, because there's still going to be insulation there, and anytime you've got those 2 differential temperatures, you're going to create condensation. And so the answer is no. All right, good question. That's all I've got on it for that one. So okay, yeah, please don't get me started on spray foam. It is. I've seen houses just destroyed because somebody came in and put spray foam insulation in a house. HVAC circuit breakers. This is not going to be a problem 99% of the time in a new construction home, but in existing homes, we see this a lot. If you walk up on a 15-year-old house, but there's a 5-year-old AC unit out there, somebody has changed that AC system out. And I'm telling you now, there's not an AC guy anywhere that's going to look at this data plate and look at the breaker size on here, the minimum breaker size, and go over to the breaker box and make sure that it has the right breaker installed. They're just not going to do it. They know to do it. They've been taught to do it, and they just don't. They're so focused on the job that they're doing that day of installing a new AC system that it gets lost. And so we see this a lot. It's not the right breaker. 99% of the time, it's not going to cause a problem. The unit's still running, but it's not correct. And it should be called out when you see it. So just be cognizant and make sure that you're looking for it. I don't imagine that there's going to be a lot of questions.
While you're still on that, showing that label there,
yes,
HCFC-22, can you explain to some of these guys what that is?
Yeah, we're going to get into that here pretty quick. HCFC is hydrochlorofluorocarbons. Say that quickly 5 times. And so the mandates that happened back in 09 and 2010-ish, somewhere in that neighborhood, forgive me, I'm getting old and I can't remember exactly when, they got rid of the hydro, right? The hydrochloro, the chloro was the problem. That's chlorine in the refrigerant. And they yelled and screamed that chlorine was causing ozone depletion, blah, 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 blah. And so we got away from that, and that moved us over to the new style 410A that everybody sees. And if you look at it, it won't say the C, it'll say hydrofluorocarbons. Basically, all they did is pull the chlorine out of the chemical mix. And so that brings us up to date with 410A, and that's what the industry has been using for quite some time now. And here in just a minute, we're going to be talking about what's about to happen with that, because that's going to be a whole nother mess. But yes.
Another question we get all the time on this R22, is there a replacement for that?
No.
So if someone finds a condenser unit that's got the 22 on the label like that, yes, what do you suggest they tell their client?
I tell them, and you can go to epa.gov, and up in the top of that website, just click in R22 phase out and search for it. And there's a giant page on the epa.gov website that talks very specifically about the phase out of R22 and the move in of 410A. And if you look really hard, you'll start seeing how we're moving away from 410A now and moving over to some new refrigerants. But yes, so I'll say that really quick. There were some manufacturers that came out with what they called quote unquote drop-in replacements for R22. You could, if you had a leaking HVAC system, use this stuff to fill out or to put into the unit instead of R22. And the reason you wanted to do that was because they phased out R22. They weren't making it, we're not importing it. And so it got to be to where R22 was $175 a pound. And so that gets quite expensive when you've got, 3 or 4 or 5 pounds of refrigerant to put into a unit because it's leaking. The problem is that if you're legitimate, if you're a legitimate contractor and you have refrigerant leaking into the atmosphere, you shouldn't be just dumping more refrigerant back into the unit, right? If I got a hole in my bucket, I'm not going to keep pouring water in it. I'm going to fix the hole. And so you got to figure out where the leak is at and fix that. Usually it's in the evaporator coil because of the formicary corrosion problem that we just talked about. But you shouldn't just keep dumping R22 in. The real way to fix this problem has been that if you've got a major leak, it's time to replace. Let's get rid of, at a minimum, your outdoor condenser and your indoor evaporator coil, and let's get 410A equipment and bring it in and get you squared away with the new style stuff. And that has been the proper way to fix the issue.
Yeah, and that's a biggie for home inspectors as they go through these homes or even businesses that have the older systems in them like that. They need to make sure that they make the client aware of that.
Yes, I'm sure that there's some of my guys, some of the inspectors that I work with on a regular basis is probably commenting right now what the website address is, but they have it in their inspection report permanently that says Your system has R22 refrigerant. Here's the website with the EPA.gov that you need to go to educate yourself on what's going on with this refrigerant and blah, blah, blah. That way you're not telling them something that may or may not be kind of sort of right. You're sending them to the source, which is the EPA.gov website.
Good points.
Yes,
Good
sir.
points. All right, Adam, one other question about spray foam addicts. I'm sorry, Chris, it's popped up again.
Yes, sir.
So, units are having to be pulled out and completely cleaned after 3 years. No HRV or ERV or filtrations at all.
Yep. 100%. You're right. Hate them. I hate them. And again, it's probably going to be a house where somebody talked them into spray foam in the attic. It wasn't done from scratch and designed that way. It was a retrofit, and it creates massive issues in a home. It can't breathe properly. Condensation problems, mold problems, just the HVAC system is now oversized for the house. It's just anybody that you ever see, tell them don't do this, please, whatever you do.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we're seeing, I'm hearing from inspectors, is that you take an older home that's got the bad insulation blown in on the attic floor, then somebody sells them the foam insulation, they come in and spray the bottom of the roof decking, and leave the other insulation there. That's where it really is going to create a problem, exactly like you're talking about.
Yes, sir. Totally agree. It's the worst thing ever. But it sounds like a great idea, you know, to a homeowner. But don't do it. Don't do it to your house, whatever you do. Condenser coils. You will see a terribly clogged up condenser coil on the left, and what a condenser coil should look like when we get done cleaning it. You literally got to take the entire unit apart to do it properly, which, as you can see on the right-hand side, is what they did. The one on the left is mainly because some idiot designed the house so that the dryer vent lint was pointed directly at the condenser coil. The way this coil works, the way the condenser works, is that there's a fan on the top, and it literally pulls in air from the sides and exhausts the air through the top. Well, if I'm pulling air in through the sides 24 hours a day, all day long, and every time you turn that dryer on, all the vents being exhausted right next to it, well, I'm going to pull in dryer vent nonstop. But we see this all the time. Dirty coils. Please look for this. A lot of times they're dirty enough that it's inhibiting the airflow, but it's really hard to see. And so, like, you got to kind of look up underneath the vents, you know, and see what's going on in there. If this is where we exhaust the heat. Quick idea about refrigeration. This is how it works, right? I take warm air and out of the house, and I run it across that evaporator coil, which is running about 40 degrees. And the refrigerant that's running through that evaporator coil absorbs the heat. One more time, I'm not quote unquote cooling the air. I'm removing the heat from the air, and then I'm shoving that air back into the house. But I've got to do something now with that heat that all of the refrigerant just absorbed. I send it back outside to this condenser, which runs around through this condenser coil that you see, and I'm pulling that air in from the ambient, from the sides, and removing the heat from the refrigerant and exhausting it out through the top. This is why when you walk up on a condenser that's running, if you put your hand over the top of it, it should be hotter than the ambient temperature. If you put your hand over the top of it and you feel cool air coming out of there, your AC unit's not working. There's something wrong. The compressor's not running, or there's a major issue. And so, but if this condenser coil is clogged and I can't get enough airflow through there, I can't remove the heat that's in that refrigerant. And now I'm shoving boiling refrigerant back up to the coil, which should be cold refrigerant. And so it creates a lot of problems. So please look for these coils. Look to make sure that that dryer vent is not pointed directly at it. And if it is, you need to have a conversation with your client. Any questions there, sir? Probably a lot of comments, probably not a lot of questions.
No, not any questions yet. Someone was asking about, where do you go for a reliable source of data on some of these things? And I was just sharing with them a good source is the buildingcenter.org. You can find out a lot of information about these things. But yeah, if the label on the condenser is not readable, you can't read it, you definitely need to put that as a comment on your report, because either the system's real old or someone has maybe borrowed that condenser somewhere else and put it in there. So, if you don't have a label, you need to mark it as no labels present.
Right, and that's true, and it bothers us too. The only way for us to gain any information at that point is to pull the top off and get the information off the side of the compressor itself. And in many cases, that'll at least tell us, the BTU ratings on the unit and that type of information. But yeah, some of these older ones, it wasn't a real data plate. They just went to having stickers on the side, not understanding that Texas sun eats away at those things pretty quickly.
Absolutely. That's all.
Yeah, go ahead.
Now I got one more. So can the homeowner keep the condenser clean by blowing debris off the coil with a garden hose?
Yes. Careful, right? Those coils are nothing. It's basically the same radiator that you have in your car. So it's aluminum fins on that coil. I don't want a homeowner out there with a pressure sprayer, right, on their water hose and spraying that coil off with high pressure. If you do that, you're going to flatten the fins on that coil and create yourself a whole nother problem. And so you want just a garden hose with your thumb over it, right, and just kind of spraying up in there, not with much pressure. If you use high pressure, you're going to jack that coil up, and we'll be out there replacing the condenser. Next category is the one that I really promised you that is the biggest issue that's about to happen to the industry. This is the same thing that happened to us with R22 and 410A that we were just talking about. Back in 09-ish, the government decided that chlorine was causing a big problem with holes in the ozone and blah, blah, blah. So they made us move from R22 to 410A. And they gave us, I want to say it was a 15-year time frame for us to move over. Well, back in the Obama administration, they signed us up for the Paris Accords, and we were rapidly now talking about moving away from 410A into something else due to the new way that they're measuring for global warming. It's called a GWP number, which is a global warming percentage. And so the new laws are calling for a maximum of 750. 410A has a rating of 2088, and so we now are being mandated to move away from 410A. When the Trump administration came in, they pushed the pause button on the whole deal. So we kind of knew that it was about to come, and that we were about to run into this problem again with moving to a new type of refrigerant. And then the Trump administration came in and hit the button, and it kind of gave us 4 years to kind of get our heads wrapped around what the heck was going to happen. Well, as soon as the Biden administration came in, they hit the fast forward button again. So here we are. Most of the manufacturers have adopted 454B, which is the bottle that you see on the left-hand side. 454B, it has the same type of capacity as 410A does. It works along the same types of pressures that we're used to seeing as 410A. And so the performance level is very similar to what we're used to seeing. The biggest problem is that it is a flammable, right? So that goes against every building code known to man, that now we're going to be using a mild flammable refrigerant in a residential setting and pumping that in and out of our, HVAC systems. That creates a lot of issues and a lot of questions. I'm not happy about it. The last time we did this, it was really hard to have a conversation with somebody that had an R22 HVAC system and tell them that, yeah, it's only, 3 to 4 years old, maybe 5, but because your evaporator coil is leaking, I now need you to spend, $8,000-9,000 for a whole new HVAC system that uses 410A because we can't get R22 equipment anymore. And that's what's about to happen again, is that you're going to see these 410A systems that are out there that may be 5, 6, 8 years old. And then when they start going bad, instead of being able to repair them, we're going to end up replacing them. And due to the fact that we can't get the refrigerant anymore, due to the fact that they're not making the equipment anymore. And so it's just one more time around where the homeowners are going to get shafted on this. And it's going to be a huge expense to the general public to have to replace their systems yet again. Now we're talking about 454B. There are a couple of manufacturers out there that are messing around with a couple of other different types of units. I want to say it's a R32, if I remember right. It's Daikin and somebody else, if I remember right, that are doing that. Also a mild flammable, but the reason that they're wanting to use a different type of refrigerant is because they manufacture that as opposed to using 454B that somebody else is manufacturing. So they want to stick with their own stuff. But this is going to be a huge blow to the industry. For those of us that have been in the industry for 10 years or more, we've seen this happen once already, and here we go again. So just a heads up, I don't know how we're going to address the idea of having a flammable in a residential setting. I don't know what that means for a technician when it comes to, I've got to get out there with a torch and solder the lines together, right? The copper lines together. How am I doing that when I've got flammable refrigerant, right? Am I going to have explosion proof motors, right? Because electrical motors generate electrical charge, and I can't have, if I've got a flammable refrigerant that's leaking in a place where there's electricity, now I've got to worry about that being crossed and maybe causing a fire or causing an explosion. Same thing with the compressors, same thing with the, the little side plate that you would typically take off of the unit to see all of the electrical controls. How is all that going to be sealed up? What this really turns into for us is a huge mess. And to give you a clue here, this is ASHRAE's standards as far as what the flammables are, right? And so 410A, like you could see at the bottom, was rated as an A1. There's just no flame propagation, right? You're not going to have any flames from the actual refrigerant itself. Well, they're labeling 454B and R32 as an A2L, which is a low flammable, but it does classify it as an A2. To give you some thoughts there, propane and butane are rated as an A3, and it goes much higher than this. You start talking about things like gasoline and things of that nature. So it is going to be a huge problem in this industry. It's going to be a massive change. It's going to cost a lot of people a lot of money. What does that mean for you? So we just had the discussion a little bit about R22 and having that discussion with a homeowner about, hey, you need to go to EPA.gov and see what this is, about, because we can't service or work with R22 anymore. Well, now you're about to do the same thing with R410A, and you're going to have to start talking to them about R454B and moving over, and that's going to cost you, if you're buying a home somewhere down the road, $8,000, $10,000, $12,000. Also, we were talking about having explosion proof motors and things like that, and sealing the electrical, and we're being told to expect the average price of HVAC equipment, just because of this changeover, to increase by about 50%. That's 50%.
Wow.
And so what used to be a $10,000 change out for a new HVAC system is probably going to cost you in the neighborhood of 15 or 18 grand to change out your unit. And so it's going to become a much more expensive piece of equipment than it is currently.
On the change out, Chris, someone's asking, would the refrigerant line sets need to be replaced too?
With the refrigerant what?
The lines, refrigerant lines?
So at this point, no, we're being told that the new refrigerant uses the same POE oil as 410A refrigerant. So we would expect that the line set during the replacement procedures get flushed. Usually we use R11 to do that with. And so we'll flush the line set, but we should be able to use the existing. So we had that same question because the last time when we went from R22 to 410A, not only did the refrigerant change, but they changed the type of oil that it used. And so at that point, we were recommending that we replace the line sets. In this case, so far from the information that we've received, the answer is no, we should be able to use the same line sets.
Sounds like job security for you, Chris, what this
I mean, don't get me wrong, right? From an HVAC business perspective, yes, we will benefit. It's for sure going to cause homeowners to have to spend a lot more money with us than what they want to. So instead of maintaining or repairing, they're going to have to replace. Do I think it's right? Probably not. But it is what it is, right? So what does this mean for your clients? And that's what this slide is about. Awareness first. First of all, you need to tell people about it, right? And go out there and get your own information. EPA.gov has got some good info out there, and get your own information that's real. And don't try to repeat that to clients in your reports. Just tell them where to go to get the information that's true and proper from the right source. Right now, it's a 15-year phase-out period is what they're telling us, but they're going to stop production of equipment in 2025. 410A refrigerant has already dramatically increased in price. Used to be, I would get a 30-pound bottle of 410A. It would cost me $160. Right now, they're running close to $350 a drum. And so we've already seen the price of 410A start to skyrocket. And when they decide that they're going to dramatically decrease the production of that, you'll see it really jump. And so maintaining your 410A system, if you have a leak in a coil or something, is going to be dramatically more expensive. An aging 410 system will soon need to be replaced instead of repaired. I think we've kind of beat that to death a little bit, but that's true. If you've got an AC unit that's 12 years old, that's still running 410A, you should either A, replace it soon before the 410A equipment goes away, or B, understand that you're going to have to replace it with much more expensive 454B system. The flammable.
Someone's asking if they're replacing a system now, can you get this newer refrigerant now?
No, you can't. No, and none of the manufacturers have started to put the new equipment up on the market space yet. Wow. And so we're being told probably end of first quarter 2023, you'll start seeing the 454B equipment available. And so that's when we're going to really understand what the price differential is going to be, and what the installation process is going to entail. But it's going to dramatically increase the price of the equipment, the price of the installation. The maintenance on these units is going to be very expensive because of all of the safety concerns with having to deal with flammable refrigerant. If I have to open up your refrigerant system, I can't imagine, the safety steps that are going to be involved for us to do that, especially being in a confined space like an attic space. So there's a lot there. Down at the bottom, you'll see what I'm telling my clients. Before you get to 2025, you should probably highly think about replacing your existing system with another 410A system. A 410A system, a modern 410A system that we can get our hands on today. And like I said, it's going to cost you 10 grand or so ish, depending on, install and equipment. But that's dramatically less than what we expect to happen when you replace with a 454B system. And so it's going to save you somewhere in the neighborhood of $5,000 to $8,000 over a 454B system. And we expect that it's going to last you 10 years plus, 12 years plus before it starts to give you trouble. And so I'm telling my clients, replace your unit now with another 410A before we have to move over to 454B because of the dramatic price increases that we're going to see with the new system installs.
Oh, I see a lot of
Anything yet, sir? You got more questions?
Yeah, I see a lot of things opening up with this new flammable material you're talking about for the gas. I mean, a lot of times these condensers get fried with lightning strike nearby. Wonder what that's going to do with this flammable refrigerant we're putting in them then.
I don't know. Again, I know that they're going to put in leak stop devices. So in other words, if you end up with a leak in a certain area, there'll be automatic valves that close that shut the system down and the refrigerant down. Similar to what you would see in a plumbing type scenario, like on a hot water heater. If you end up with a leak, they've got those valve stops that automatically shut the pressure down. So there's going to be a lot of that type of safety components that are going to be involved in these units to keep that kind of thing from happening.
Wow. Well, what a challenge you guys have in front of you as AC contractors.
Yeah, it's going to get very expensive. Everybody's going to have new type of equipment to deal with these units. It's going to be a massive amount of training that's going to happen to work with these units. I'm expecting that there will probably be some mandated licensing that's going to happen to work with flammable refrigerant. I don't know that that's true yet, but that's just kind of some of the things that have been tossed around.
So if I see you come out to service my air conditioner, I expect to see you in a hazmat suit.
Well, we'll be carrying a lot of stuff for sure. And a lot of that's right here. The very first thing is that we're expecting in the HVAC industry is that there's going to be a lot of new regulations that tell us how to do our job that are not out there right now. There's going to be a lot of new training courses that everybody's going to have to go through. Tons and tons of new types of tools. The stuff that we've used for vacuum pumps to vacuum the system out to the gauges that we use to take pressures to everything, all of those tools and all of that equipment is going to have to be replaced with new stuff. Much longer repair times. I can't imagine, in today's world, we just suck the refrigerant into the condenser and then we can open up a refrigerant system right there, do whatever we need to do, weld the joint back up and be out of there. That's not going to be the case with this. They're talking about not even being able to solder onto the copper at all, that we may be using zoom locks or pressure type fittings to be able to connect line set tubing to these units. When I say pressure fittings, think when you're thinking about plumbing, and we're talking about those snap fittings that go onto plumbing pipes, the same type of thing. And so we may not even be able to weld the joints on these units anymore. So we're not sure with a lot of the questions that we've got as to how we're going to operate with this, but it's not going to be fun. It's going to be a lot more time consuming and a lot more expensive. Any last questions there about the new refrigerant?
No, just got a comment says, I'm sorry, but this sounds insane. Is there no other non-flammable refrigerant?
Nope.
So I'm sure that some of the questions concerned, we've got the same thing that you guys in the HVAC system or business have. Yeah,
we're very concerned. We're working together with the manufacturers to try and make sure that we're up to speed as much as possible. Yeah, it's not going to be fun. On top of that, what everybody has come to know as a quote unquote SEER rating, which is the efficiency rating of HVAC systems, is about to change. And so the Department of Energy, as you can read here, has changed the minimum efficiency ratings. And we're going to increase them basically between 7 to 10%, depending on whether you're in the north, southwest, or southeast area. But basically a 7 to 10% increase in minimal efficiency ratings for our HVAC systems. For us down here in Texas, it's on the southeast side. Instead of being a 14 SEER rated, it'll be a 14.3. which doesn't sound like a lot, but again, that's a 7 to 10% increase. But when you're looking at those numbers there on that little diagram, I want you to notice that, for instance, on the southeast, it says that the minimum rating is 14.3 SEER 2, which creates a whole nother problem in the way that we measure. So they've decided to change the way that they are actually measuring the HVAC system performance. And so all of the manufacturers are having to take their testing facilities and completely revamp them to work with the new SEER 2 ratings, which is insane. Because to be honest, it's only been in the last year or so that we've gotten homeowners to understand that a SEER rating is an efficiency rating, and they've begun to wrap their head around that. And they understand that these days, 14 to 16 SEER is kind of the average and the norm. Well, now 16 SEER doesn't sound anything like 16 SEER anymore. It's about a 15, or a 15 SEER rating is now a 14.3 on the SEER 2 scale. And so you can see by the scale over to the right that it's going to make a very difficult conversation with a homeowner when I roll up to Ricky's house and he says, well, but my buddy Johnny down the road had a unit put in last year, and he says that a 16 SEER is what I need to get. And I'm telling him that it's no longer a 16 SEER, it's a 16 SEER 2 rating. And even though it's the same performance as your buddy down the road, you understand how difficult that's going to be? He's going to think that we're screwing him over and getting him a minimal efficiency system that's not up to par with what his buddy down the road got or what we got the last time. And so it's going to make for a very difficult conversation. From a home inspector's viewpoint, sometimes on these units, you'll see the yellow sticker that says EER rating, right? That EER rating says that this condenser by itself performs at this particular level. Understand that that's not the system as a whole, right? That's that single piece of equipment, the EER rating. Well, even that's now changing to an EER 2 rating. If you have your client ask you, hey, can you tell me what SEER rating our existing systems are? Your answer should be no, I can't, because you can't. By looking at the model number on that unit, you can't tell them what the system efficiency is, because you would have to know the model of the outdoor, the model of the furnace, the model of the coil, and then go to the AHRI website, input all that information, and then it can tell you what the actual efficiency rating is of all three of those components working together. And if you happen to have an older home where I've got a ream indoor unit and a carrier outdoor unit and a train furnace, well, you for sure can't tell them what the efficiency rating is, because none of that stuff's made to work together anyway. So all of that stuff gets thrown out the window. So from a home inspector's point of view, first of all, you need to understand that the ratings are changing and that the way we measure them are changing, that it's now SEER 2 versus SEER, and you need to be able to have that conversation. But don't try to tell a homeowner that their SEER rating is whatever, because unless you're willing to go through all of those hoops to jump through of getting all their stuff together and going to AHRI and downloading all that information, you really can't give them an accurate measurement as to what the efficiency rating is. It's just impossible for you to do. It's impossible for me to do that without going to the AHRI and getting a certificate. So, any questions there, Paul?
No, none right now.
Wow, I'm surprised.
I think you've got all of our minds just in a whirlwind going about.
Well, yeah, that's kind of why I saved this to the end, because I'm hoping maybe this will be the part that you remember, because this is the stuff that's keeping me awake at night. So expect confusion, which is exactly what we're going to get. Like I said, they've just gotten used to R22 versus 410A, and now and SEER ratings, and now I'm going to throw 454B at them. And oh, by the way, it's flammable, and SEER ratings don't mean anything anymore. Now it's a SEER 2 rating. And we can thank our glorious government for doing all of this to us. So yeah, it's going to get very, very difficult for us to wrap our heads around it, let alone trying to get a homeowner to wrap their heads around what the heck is going on at their house. This is for my buddies that are in the Southeast region. So if you're anywhere from Texas to Florida, here's a little bit of insider information from you. We are used to using 80% gas furnaces. We've used them forever. And the only mandates that have been forced upon us have been that your minimal efficiency rating for air conditioning be a minimum of a 14 SEER, right? And so up on the north side, you were forced with higher efficiency ratings on your furnaces and on your heating systems. Down in the south, we were forced to upgrade our efficiency ratings when it comes to air conditioning, which is smart, right? North side, you guys are going to use a lot more heat during the winter, and down in the south, we use a lot more air conditioning during the summer, so that makes sense. Well, we are going to see 90% gas furnaces for us down in the Southeast region. We're going to see that mandated for us, and it's coming really, really soon. And we are not used to dealing with 90% gas furnaces. You'll see them every once in a while, but not very often, and they are a whole different animal. And expect to see AC installers installing them way wrong, installing them with all types of issues, and you're going to have to learn pretty soon what to look for, and to know how it's supposed to be installed, so that you know what to call out when it's done wrong, because that's what you're going to see is a whole bunch of wrong stuff happening really soon when we have to move over this. If you look at this 90% diagram here, you have a combustion air intake, and then you also have your gas valve combustion air exhaust on this unit, right? And so those are the two usually 2-inch PVC pipes that you'll see. One is drawing air in to the combustion chamber, and one is exhausting the exhaust gas out of here. The reason that we have to have a separate air intake for the combustion air these days is because it is a closed combustion chamber. Typically on an 80% gas furnace, you'll start the furnace up and you can actually see the little glow light come on. You can see it light the burners. You can actually see the burners running right there in front of you. It's an open combustion chamber. This is a closed combustion chamber due to trying to get to the efficiency rating. And so therefore it's not open to the air that's in the attic. So you have to bring in combustion air into that inlet. And so that's why there's now 2 pipes running up to your roof line versus 1 pipe. 2 ways to install this. You might have 2 separate pipes going through the roof line, or you may only have 1. If you have 1, then you have to have a special unit up there that actually divides between the combustion and the air intake, or the exhaust and the air intake. And so it depends on what they've used. So now you have to go up to the roof line to see what's above the roof line to make sure that it's being pulled in and exhausted properly. You actually have 2 heat exchangers on this unit. You have a primary heat exchanger and your secondary heat exchanger. That secondary heat exchanger creates condensation. Okay, so heads up, we've been talking about condensation problems with HVAC on the air conditioning side quite a bit. Now you are going to be creating condensation in the furnace, in the heat exchanger assembly during the heating operation. And so now I've got to run yet another condensation drain line out of the heater to go and remove that condensation. Normally what we see is yet another condensation drain line that's going to tap into where we would see the coil draining out to, which will go down to your laboratory sink. So just keep in mind, you're going to see yet another water line that's going to be running through the attic space. And so this is going to create a lot of hoopla, at least down here in the Southeast, for people that don't understand how to work on these with an internal combustion chamber and how to repipe these things. So yet another expense for a homeowner. These things are almost double in price from an 80% gas furnace, and a lot of other hoops that you have to jump through to be able to install it, right? So instead of having that metal flue pipe, I've got to now pull that out. I've got a different type of flashing that's got to go on the roof. I've got to run PVC pipe everywhere. Like, it's a whole different ballgame. And so again, more expenses that are coming to our homeowners down here, and a huge learning curve for our installation and maintenance guys. So, any questions there, sir?
Now, someone just mentioned that would this be the type of furnace you'd have to use in a spray foam attic?
Yes, and the reason being, again, is that you have sealed off that attic space to where it doesn't breathe. In other words, I'm not bringing air in from like a ridgeline vent up at the top, or I'm not bringing air in from the soffits over on the side of the house. There's no air breathing inside of that attic space. So I cannot use an 80% gas furnace that's supposed to be open to the environment. I have to use a 90% or plus furnace where I'm bringing the combustion air into the intake directly from the roof line.
Okay, you mentioned a website a while ago. Was it AHRI? Someone's asking, they want to know if you know, can give them the exact website.
You know what? Give me a second. I'll look it up for you while I got a second.
And someone else is asking, how do these new rules affect heat pumps?
Give me 1 second. So AHRI is AHRI. Let me make sure. Yes, AHRI net, NET, AHRInet.org. And that's the Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration Institute website. So that's AHRI. There's a section there where you can click on it and actually look up the efficiency rating on the systems. You'll have to punch in a bunch of information, the manufacturer, the model numbers, all that neat stuff. It'll come up and give you an AHRI certificate number and then tell you what the rating is. And you can actually print out the actual AHRI certificate for that unit. Basically, it's, you know, when you go to buy a car and they tell you what the miles per gallon rating is, well, that's kind of the AHRI does that. They're a third-party organization. They do all the testing for all of the different manufacturers, and they're the ones that make sure that when a manufacturer says that it's rated at 16, that it's actually performing at 16. So was there something else, Paul?
Yeah, they asked, how do these new rules affect heat pumps?
Heat pumps are the same thing. I mean, the minimal ratings that we saw there are still going to have to be adhered to, right? Give me a second, I'll pull back. And so if you look, you've got split AC, packaged AC, split heat pump, and then packaged heat pump. And so a package unit, as everybody knows, you'll see them more in commercial settings versus residential, but sometimes you'll still see package units on a residential home. And so Southeast, your split heat pump, your minimal rating is going to be a 14.3. And it's basically the same as a split AC system. On a packaged AC or a packaged heat pump, it's at 13.4. But yes, it does affect heat pumps just as well. But so far, I haven't seen any deviation between the difference between a split versus a heat pump. They're the same minimal efficiency rating.
Okay, I had one other question. Says the exterior air being brought into the system, so they're seeing not in the roof line, but with a vertical exterior wall. And
that's fine. Yes, you can do it either way.
Okay. And that's all the questions I've got, man. Great.
All right. That's better than I figured, actually. There's a lot of information. And between 90% furnaces, new refrigerant, new type of efficiency standards, it's ridiculous what's about to happen to us in the next 3 to 5 years, and what's going to happen to our clients, and how to have that conversation with them and telling them what's going on and make sure that they understand it. But again, the easiest way to do that is to point them to the right information and not try and put it in your report as your info, right? You always want to CYA yourself and refer them to EPA or AHRI or some type of government organization that's making these standards. Because I promise it's not me, but people want to blame me all the time for it.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, I want to say thank you for coming in and giving us this. It's been an awesome class. I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us here. And I know that it's helped a bunch of us. And just hats off to you for a great webinar. And again, just thank you so much for doing this for us.
Don't worry, sir. I had a great time. That's my personal information there. I'll even tell you that's my personal cell phone. You're welcome to call me or shoot me a text message anytime. More than happy to help you out. Just give me a shout. Let me know what we can do for you.
Awesome. I appreciate it. A couple of announcements before I close a webinar out. I want to remind you, for those of you that are Texas inspectors on this webinar, we do have a webinar coming up April the 25th from 9 to 11. It's another 2-hour webinar, but we will have the TREC Inspectors Advisory Committee chair and a couple of their members, plus a TREC attorney online to talk about the new TREC report form and the standards of practice and be able to answer your questions. So I know that is one that most Texas inspectors will not want to miss. So I invite you to it. If you need the link to that or any of our webinars, you can go to InterNACHI.org. Just type in webinar in the search bar once you're on the InterNACHI site, and all of our webinars will come up, including this one will be recorded. It'll be posted here. Probably give us a couple of weeks and it should be posted so you can go back and refer to it. But also want to tell you guys and gals that's on the line with us, October the 20th through the 22nd this year, we have our national conference over in Ontario, California. So yeah, again, that'll be listed on the InterNACHI site for all the information. But again, thanks everybody for attending. And I hope you guys have a great week and look forward to seeing our next webinar. Again, thank you, Chris. Appreciate it, buddy.
Thank you, sir. Y'all have a good one.
You too.